Let's lock in. This topic is all about the psychological side of performance, how movement skills are learned, how good performance looks, how skills are classified, how performers stay focused, and how guidance and feedback help improvement. OCR says the topics or the themes of this topic that you need to know include characteristics of skillful movement, classification of skills, goal setting, mental preparation, types of guidance, and types of feedback. OCR also says learners must be able to apply the theory to practice, which means exam answers must use real sporting examples and not just rely on definitions. The easiest way to understand this whole topic is to picture a performer learning a skill, right? Firstly, the skill needs to be understood, then it needs to be practiced, then it needs to be refined over and over again. Along the way, the performer might use goals, mental preparation, guidance, and feedback to improve. So this topic is really about how performance becomes skillful. One important OCR exam warning straight away is that this topic is not about vague psychology waffle, right? OCR specification and support materials repeatedly push for you to use practical application. That means you need to name the skill, explain it clearly, and link it to a real sporting situation. OCR's 2024 examiner report also noted that some candidates struggled when they could not identify the characteristics of skillful movement clearly, and some gave incorrect examples of mechanical guidance. So in this video, you really want to lock in so that we don't make those same mistakes. Starting with motor skills and skillful movement, what are we actually talking about here? OCR says you must know the definition of motor skills. A motor skill is a function involving specific movements of the body's muscles to perform a certain task. So a motor skill is not just being good at sports. It is a learned movement task such as serving, passing, dribbling, catching, jumping, or shooting. Skillful movement also is efficient, predetermined, coordinated, fluent, and aesthetically pleasing. Let's look at these 5 characteristics because these 5 characteristics are very fundamental to skillful movement. So efficiency means wasting as little energy, time, and movement as possible. Skillful movement is efficient and technically accurate. So efficiency is really about doing a movement in a way that is economical. So picture a swimmer, for example, a high-level swimmer. Their stroke looks very smooth, controlled, and powerful, but it's not messy. They're not splashing wildly all over the place and wasting movement. Or you can think of a footballer delivering a good football pass. The player does not need 3 extra touches and a big awkward leg swing to pass the ball. The ball is passed cleanly and effectively. That is what we mean by efficiency. Next, we have predetermined. A skillful movement is also predetermined. In simple terms, this means the performer knows what they are trying to do before they actually do it. Skillful movement is where predetermined results can be achieved with maximum certainty. So imagine, for example, a netball player making a chest pass. Their intended target is already chosen. That is predetermined. Or imagine a golfer taking a putt. The golfer already knows the direction, the weight, and the result they are aiming for. That is predetermined. These movements are not random. They have a clear purpose. And this is where students can get a little bit sloppy and say things like, it is accurate. Accuracy does help, but predetermined is what you want to use. Predetermined is slightly different. It's about the fact that the performer had a clear intention even before the movement began. Next, we have coordinated. A skillful movement is coordinated, and that means different body parts work together in the correct order and at the correct time. For example, a golf swing, you're using your arms, your torso, and your legs together. Or think about a tennis serve. The feet position, the body, the legs, and the trunk and the shoulder and everything are all moving together, and the wrist as well, all helping to direct the racket. If all of those parts are not working together, the serve is going to break down. So coordination is really about timing and teamwork happening inside the body. Next, we have fluent. Fluency means the movement flows naturally without awkward pauses, any obvious hesitation, or any jerky changes in speed. So imagine a gymnast on a floor routine or a basketball layup performed confidently in one smooth action. That is fluency. And fluency matters because it usually tells you that the performer is in control. When a movement is hesitant or jerky or shaky, it suggests uncertainty, it suggests poor timing, and it suggests poor technique. Next, aesthetic. A skillful movement is aesthetic or aesthetically pleasing. This means it's visually attractive or appealing to the senses. This does not mean that style matters more than effectiveness. It just means that a genuinely skillful movement often looks good because it's so smooth, it's so controlled, and it's so technically proper. A diver, for example, entering the water cleanly, or a gymnast linking different movements together beautifully, or a top-class badminton player gliding across the court can all look aesthetic because the movement is so refined. So, these are the 5 characteristics that you need to know. They all connect together, and a skillful movement tends to look good because it is already efficient, coordinated, and fluent, and aesthetic, and predetermined. Now let's look at classification of skills. This is how we sort skills into groups. So OCR says you need to know the 2 continua. Continua is just the plural for continuum. OCR says you need to know the 2 continua used to classify skills: the difficulty continuum and the environmental continuum. That means for the difficulty, we have simple to complex, and for the environmental continuum, we have open to closed. A really important misconception here: you must classify the skill, not just name the sport. That's what a lot of students might get wrong. So don't just say football and classify football on the continuum, but you want to pick something, a skill that happens in football, like a penalty kick in football, or a pass in football, or a tackle in football. Now let's look at simple and complex skills. A simple skill is one that is quickly learned because there are very few decisions to make. Meanwhile, a complex skill requires lots of focus and decision making. A standing badminton serve in a controlled practice environment is fairly simple, so we can put that somewhere around here. You can say a standing badminton serve. It's fairly simple. We can put it more on the simple side. This is because there are not many decisions to make, the environment is predictable, and the movement pattern is quite contained. But on the other hand, a gymnastics vault, a tennis serve under pressure, or a spin ball in cricket is much more complex. So we can put those anywhere near here towards the complex extreme of the continuum. And this is because timing, technique, body control, and precision demands are far higher. Now let's look at opened versus closed skills. Open skills are skills that are affected by the environment, and they usually need adaptation. Meanwhile, closed skills happen in predictable environment. And one thing to note about open skills is that they are usually externally paced. Externally paced. A penalty kick in football is closer to being a closed skill because the situation is relatively stable and the performer can plan the action. A pass during an open play in a football match is much more open because opponents, teammates, space, and pressure are all changing. That means the performer has to constantly adapt to their environment. This is one of the most important exam ideas in the topic, and that is that the same sport can contain both open and closed skills. That's why OCR wants you to name the specific skill and justify instead of just broadly naming the sports. Now let's look at goal setting and why it matters. OCR says you must understand the use of goal setting for exercise or for training or for motivation and for improving and optimizing performance. In a nutshell, goal setting increases motivation, focus, and the opportunity to assess one's progress. And that means goals help performance in three big ways. First, they help you stick to your training because there is something clear to aim for. Secondly, they can increase motivation because progress feels purposeful. Thirdly, they can improve performance because the performer is targeting something specific rather than just training vaguely. So if a runner says, I want to get better, that is a weak goal. But if they say something more comprehensive like, I want to reduce my 1,500-meter time by 10 seconds in 6 weeks, that gives more of a strong goal and it helps to be able to build a great training structure. So goal setting basically turns a wish into a concrete plan. Now let's look at SMART targets, and let's also zone in on one specific trap that people might fall for when they are answering OCR GCSE exam questions. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, recorded, and timed. Some students make the mistake of getting R wrong because they put realistic or relevant or something else that they got from another exam board. Don't fall for that mistake. For OCR GCSE, R stands for recorded. So let's break down these parts of the acronym clearly. Specific means the target should focus on the exact skill, the exact activity, or the exact fitness area that is being improved. Measurable means it can be checked numerically or clearly observed. Achievable means it is challenging but possible. Recorded means it is written down and progress is logged. Timing means there is a deadline. So a good SMART goal could be something like improve my basketball free throw success from 6 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 within 4 weeks. Recording my results after each practice session. That is a SMART goal because it's specific, measurable, achievable, recorded, and timed. Another SMART exam point. SMART goals should be evaluated and adjusted where necessary. So good goal setting is not just writing a target once and forgetting it. It is constantly checking whether it's working. So it's worth mentioning that when you are answering exam questions. Next, let's look at mental preparation. OCR lists 4 mental preparation techniques: imagery, mental rehearsal, selective attention, and positive thinking. These help performers to improve their performance by managing their emotions beneficially. So the key message here is that mental preparation is not just magic. It actually helps the performer to manage their nerves, manage their confidence and their focus so that the skill has a better chance of coming out properly. Let's start with imagery and rehearsal. Imagery and mental rehearsal are similar but not exactly the same. So mental rehearsal means picturing yourself performing the skill successfully or imagining a positive outcome. Meanwhile, imagery is more about imagining a relaxing or happy place to control your thoughts and lower anxiety. So if a diver closes their eyes and pictures the dive being executed perfectly from start to finish, that is mental rehearsal. But if that same diver uses calming imagery, for example, they imagine themselves laying in a large, peaceful field of flowers and cotton candy or whatever, and they use that to settle their nerves before competing, that is imagery. This distinction matters because students often merge the two together. So a clean way to remember it is mental rehearsal means imagining the performance, Imagery means imagining something calming or helpful to control your mental state. Next, let's look at selective attention and positive thinking. Selective attention means focusing on the important stimuli and blocking out any distractions. So, a goalkeeper facing a penalty may focus on the kicker's body shape, meanwhile, they ignore the crowd noise. Another example, a tennis player may focus on the toss and the contact point with the ball to the racket rather than focusing on the scoreboard. Positive thinking helps to increase confidence, and that might be simple self talk, such as telling yourself to stay composed, or be strong through the ball, or I've done this a million times in training. So the point here is not to lie to yourself, it's to stop negative thoughts taking over your performance. Moving on to guidance. Guidance is basically a method used to convey information to a performer to aid when they are learning skills. OCR says you need to know the types, their advantages and their disadvantages, and also practical examples. So the four types of guidance are visual guidance, verbal guidance, manual guidance, and mechanical guidance. A very important distinction is to remember that guidance is about helping the learner understand how to perform a skill, while feedback, which we are going to look at further on in this video, is about how well the skill has been performed. Sometimes students tend to mix those up, so it's worthwhile to remember the distinction between guidance and feedback. So starting with visual guidance. Visual guidance is where learners observe a demonstration or video. One key advantage of visual guidance is that it can be shown to lots of people at the same time, which obviously saves up time. Visual guidance is especially useful when the performer needs a clear picture of what the movement should look like. A PE teacher demonstrating a chest pass, a coach showing a video of a front crawl stroke, or a gymnast watching a model performance are all examples of visual guidance. The downside of visual guidance is that visual guidance only helps if the model is clear and accurate. If the demonstration is poor, if it's too fast, if it's hard to see, the learner may copy the wrong thing. Next, let's look at verbal guidance. Verbal guidance involves spoken instructions. An advantage of verbal guidance, it works well with experienced performers who understand the terminology. A disadvantage is that too much technical language, too much verbal guidance can actually overwhelm and or confuse inexperienced learners. So verbal guidance is great when the learner can understand the words. For example, a more advanced hurdler may benefit from guidance like drive the lead knee higher or attack the first 3 strides. But a complete beginner to hurdles may not understand the technical wording and can become confused or overloaded. That makes verbal guidance very dependent on the type of learner. So it's not automatically good or bad. It just depends on whether the performer can actually understand it and benefit from it. Manual guidance. Manual guidance means physically supporting or moving the learner to help them perform the skill. And one of its key benefits is that the learner gets a feel for the movement. Sometimes this is known as a kinesthetic feeling, kinesthesia. Another benefit of manual guidance is that it can be used to keep learners safe. This is really useful for beginners who are learning awkward or risky skills. For example, a teacher supporting a student's body during a gymnastics movement or helping to guide limb movement in swimming. A downside of manual guidance is that it cannot usually be used on many performers at once, and it may create reliance if the learner is never fully allowed to perform independently, so they won't know what it feels like to actually execute the skill on themselves, and they can become over-reliant, over-dependent on the support. Next, we have mechanical guidance. Mechanical guidance uses equipment or aids to support performance. Benefits it brings are benefits like improvement in balance, increased confidence, improvement in safety. An example is using a trampoline harness. OCR's 2024 examiner report also noted that some candidates gave an incorrect example of mechanical guidance by saying a safety mat on landing is a form of mechanical guidance. So let's pick this apart. A harness in trampoline or a support aid that stabilizes the movement is mechanical guidance because it's actively assisting the performance. A safety mat alone is not the same thing. So that is an OCR exam trap to remember, because a mat is just there on the floor. It might be protecting you, cushioning you in some way, but it's not actually supporting the actual movement. A sensible downside of mechanical guidance is it sometimes reduces independent learning if the performer becomes over-dependent on the aid. Now let's look at types of feedback. OCR says you need to know 6 types of feedback, and we're going to look at all of them. We're going to look at intrinsic feedback, extrinsic feedback, knowledge of performance, knowledge of results, positive feedback, and negative feedback. Let's start with intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback comes from the performer's own senses and feelings. That means information from inside the body, such as how the movement felt, whether the timing felt right, whether the contact felt clean. And you can also link this to kinesthetic information, because intrinsic feedback essentially pulls from that internal feeling of the movement, which we mentioned previously can be referred to as kinesthesia or kinesthetic information. So, for example, if a golfer says something like, "Oh, that putt felt very heavy," or if a sprinter says something like, "My start felt very slow," that is intrinsic feedback. It comes from their own body and their own movement awareness. Extrinsic feedback, on the other hand, comes from outside the performer, such as a coach, peers, a parent, the team captain, referees, or even spectators. So, for example, a coach saying, "Your follow through was too short," is an example of extrinsic feedback. Now let's look at knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Knowledge of results is feedback about the outcome only. Knowledge of performance is feedback about how the movement was performed. This is actually one of the easiest things to confuse, so let's make it very clear. If a basketball player hears, "Oh, you scored 7 out of 10 shots," that is knowledge of results, because it is about the outcome. But if they hear, "Oh, your elbow was flaring out and your release point on those shots was very low," that is knowledge of performance, because it's talking about the technique, it's talking about the process. So knowledge of result tells you what happened, knowledge of performance tells you why it happened. Now let's look at positive and negative feedback. Positive feedback focuses on the correct aspects of performance, while negative feedback focuses on the incorrect aspects. Too much negative feedback can be demotivating for a beginner. So, examples. If a coach says, "Good head position and nice follow through on that shot," that is an example of positive feedback. If they say, "Oh, your grip was wrong and your wrist collapsed on that swing," that is negative feedback. Both can be useful, but they affect performers differently. So in practice, beginners often need more positive feedback to build confidence, while more experienced performers may cope better with precise corrective feedback. Alright, final recap, because I'm aware we have gone through a lot of information in this video. So let's make a final quick whistle stop tour recap of everything we have touched on. So we started with motor skill. A motor skill is a learned movement task. Skillful movement is efficient, predetermined, coordinated, fluent, and aesthetic. Skills can be classified on the difficulty continuum, simple to complex. and the environmental continuum from open to closed. Goal setting helps with motivation, training, and performance. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, recorded, timed. Mental preparation includes imagery, mental rehearsal, selective attention, and positive thinking. Guidance is how the learner is shown or helped to perform the skill. It can be visual, verbal, manual, or mechanical guidance. And finally, feedback is information about performance. It can be intrinsic feedback, extrinsic, knowledge of results, knowledge of performance, positive and negative feedback. Do not fall into these common OCR traps. Do not say the R in SMART means realistic or relevant or something else. Say recorded. And do not classify the whole sport when you are classifying skills. Classify the specific skill within that sport. Do not confuse guidance with feedback. Do not confuse knowledge of results with knowledge of performance. And do not give a random safety mat as a mechanical guidance. You're going to get it wrong. And if you want to continuously recap this topic, continuously practice with exam questions, because that is the best way to improve your grades, then check out our platform www.superpeonline.com, the best PE platform in the world. I will see you in the next video.